strangling productive American car manufacturers in Ohio, in South Carolina, in Tennessee, and Alabama, who are producing cars for the market in order to save Chrysler, which essentially failed the market test. Protectionism is the worst possible response. Chapter 11 bankruptcy is a lot smarter way to go for Chrysler.
What is your greatest fear if the government starts engaging in protectionism? What do you think they'll do and what will happen?
Well, I don't really think there's going to be a lot of protectionism because, quite frankly, there's not much industry left to protect. I mean, it's already been destroyed. I mean, it's not like, if we have duties or tariffs on foreign-made products, that Americans will simply buy American-made products. Those products don't exist. I mean, there are some of them. I suppose if they raise tariffs high enough on imported cars, we'd be forced to buy some of the more expensive, less efficient models manufactured here in the United States. But for most industries, protectionism isn't an issue. And I think, if anything, I mean, we speak about it, but it's not going to happen. What's really the threat to our economy is that they continue with the stimuluses, that they continue with the bailouts, that the government continues the cheap money policies of Greenspan. It's interesting that he was just interviewed the other day.
What did he say the other day that got you so riled?
Well, he had the gall to say that the low interest rate policy that he pursued had nothing to do with the housing bubble. It had nothing to do with subprime. He said his 1% interest rates had no effect on mortgage rates. The guy is crazy. I mean, mortgage rates were directly affected by the Fed funds rate because that's where the teaser rates were set. All adjustable rate mortgages were based on the Fed funds rate or some short-term interest rate that was affected by Fed funds. I mean, maybe the 30-year fixed-rate mortgages weren't affected, but the 30-year fixed-rate mortgages aren't why we had a real estate bubble. It was the option arms. It was the interest only. It was these teaser rates. These are all the products that were directly affected by Greenspan's 1% interest rate. And then when he claimed, then he said later, I tried to raise interest rates, but long-term rates fell. Well, that's because he raised them in quarter-point increments. He had that measured response. If he'd have been more aggressive, if he had raised rates faster and by bigger amounts, then he would have had a desired effect on long-term rates. Who was this guy kidding? I mean, he blew up this entire bubble. He blew until he was out of breath.
Tom Palmer, is Greenspan pretty much discredited amongst economists, or are there still people who think that this was the private sector that caused the recession and Greenspan kept it from getting worse?
No, I think the Greenspan put, as it was known, with this willingness to lower interest rates to make sure no business goes out of business was a colossal mistake. Look at interest rates June 2003 to June 2004 were in actual real interest rates in negative territory. In other words, you were being paid to borrow. Well, what do we expect is going to happen? I will disagree with half of what Peter said there. The part about flooding the market with cheap credit, I think, was exactly spot on. But indeed, protectionism is very serious. The U.S. is a gigantic export leader in a wide range of different industries and services. And the point is, if you make it more expensive to import, at the same time you make it more expensive to export. A tax on imports has, in the aggregate, the same impact as a tax on exports. Our export industries are at serious risk if the U.S. moves in a protectionist direction. And make no mistake about it, the U.S. exports a huge amount of both commodities, manufactured goods, and services. Those industries will be very negatively impacted.
Foreign protectionism, not that U.S. protectionism, or that foreign.
No, you're wrong about that, Peter. No, you're not right about that.
Go ahead, Tom.
If you diminish the amount of imports that we're doing, it means, in effect, foreigners are selling less to us. They have less money with which to buy our products.
Well, that's
so
not a problem. We have a huge trade deficit. I mean, I'm not worried about that.
Well, then,
Need Americans importing fewer products. We can't afford to import all these products. We're broke.
No, I think you're wrong about that. The problem with regard to the deficit was our budget deficit meant that our government was selling treasuries around the world. That's unrelated to the trade deficit per se, which is the willingness to form.
It's not unrelated because one of the reasons we're able to run these huge trade deficits.
Here's what I want to tee up.
Because the rest of the world is recycling that into and lending us the money to buy products and then buying our treasury bonds. They're not unrelated. But ultimately, we can't finance. Forgetting about the budget deficit, we can't go on with trade deficits. We have to export to import. We just can't print money to import. We need to export as much as we import. We need to balance the books. We just can't keep importing more than we export and then putting the rest on a credit card.
Why are you, Tom, not critical of the artificially cheap credit in the Greenspan years, knowing as you do that at some point that credit had to rise to its natural rate, and when it did, a lot of folks couldn't afford to meet that natural rate?
No, you're right. No, I want to make it very clear. I disagreed with half of what Peter said. The second half about artificially cheap credit, he was spot on. My point was, when you lower interest rates to negative territory, what do you think is going to happen? You're paying people to borrow. And we got asset bubbles that showed up in a number of places, most notably the housing market, where the huge housing bubble was created by a combination of cheap, easy credit and these government-sponsored enterprises, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, who were buying the mortgages from banks.
If Tim Geithner,
that is exactly the problem.
If Tim Geithner called you up this afternoon and said, we're going to make it impossible for Americans to buy foreign goods by imposing tariffs so high that only the super rich would pay them, what would you tell him from Econ 101 and from the past 70 years of American history?
I'd tell him, number one, you can't create wealth by stopping people from trading. Trading itself creates wealth. I exchange something worth less to me than what I get, and the other person does the same. We create wealth through exchange and trade. Second matter, historically, this is the easiest way to crash an economy, not only the American economy, but the world economy. And the experience of the Smoot-Hawley tariff is very powerful evidence. If you want to find...
But, the proper way to discourage Americans from buying more imported goods is for the Fed to raise interest rates. And that would discourage them from buying all sorts of goods. Because the problem is Americans are buying goods, both foreign and domestic, with borrowed money, and they shouldn't be doing that. But ultimately, we're not going to need the U.S. government to raise tariffs to price Americans out of the market. Ultimately, the dollar is going to collapse. Countries like China that are artificially propping up our currency are going to stop doing it, and then we're not going to be able to afford to buy imported goods because they're going to be too expensive. That's going to happen eventually. I think it's going to happen relatively soon.
I have to apologize to you, Peter, and to our listeners that we lost the signal for Tom Palmer, and our wonderful technicians are working to get it back. Is it unrealistic to expect that the Fed would ever allow interest rates just to float at where they would naturally be, so that you could rent money at its true cost rather than at the cost of what the government wants it to be, Peter?
Ultimately, they're going to have to. I mean, price controls don't work. They always distort markets. They lead to shortages or surpluses. And in the case of keeping interest rates too low, we have a shortage of savings and we have a surplus of borrowing. I mean, and that's why the economy is so screwed up. So eventually, the government's going to have to stop trying to fight the free market and let interest rates seek their natural level. And in a country like the United States, where everybody is borrowing and nobody is saving, interest rates have to be very high. And then when that happens, Americans aren't going to be borrowing money to spend it because the cost of that borrowed money will be so expensive. Meanwhile, there'll be a real incentive to save because the return on savings will be very high. And ultimately, interest rates will be able to start coming down over time as more and more people seek high interest rates by saving, and fewer Americans are forced to pay those rates. And the people who will be borrowing will be businesses who can actually put the money to good use because they can afford the interest payments. Consumers won't be able to afford it because what they're buying throws off no income.
Right. Peter, our good friend and Freedom Watch colleague Shelley Rose joins us now. And Shelley, of course, as wonderful as she is, almost runs a shadow Freedom Watch, if you will, with bloggers expressing their views and Twitterers, Shelley, if I'm saying this right, expressing their views and sort of going back and forth on the Internet while we're going back and forth on the air and on the Internet. Shelley, welcome back. Do you have any questions for Peter or for me from our wonderful people that have been Twittering away with you?
Yes, I do. I have some great questions this week. The first one